The late afternoon sunlight slanted through the floor-to-ceiling glass of the Heir Villa's courtyard, gilding the trimmed hedges and pristine marble patio that had never known a speck of dirt. It was the kind of perfect, sterile wealth that made ordinary lives look messy, inadequate, and unworthy by comparison. And today, Richard Heir intended to make one young woman feel exactly that small. Elena stood quietly by the garden gate, her canvas tote bag slung over one shoulder, her plain white sneakers scuffed at the toes. She had dressed simply, exactly as she always did, soft neutral tones, no designer logos, no jewelry, nothing that could possibly scream status. To anyone watching, she was precisely what she appeared to be, a regular 24-year-old girl from the downtown neighborhood, working hourly shifts at a local community cafe, living in a modest apartment, scraping together a quiet, ordinary life. Beside her stood Lucas Heir, the sole heir of the Heir enterprise empire. Tall, gentle-featured, with the quiet restlessness of someone born into golden chains. His tailored casual wear fit him effortlessly, the kind of understated luxury that cost more than Elena's entire year of rent. Lucas's fingers brushed gently against hers, a silent promise of support. He had brought her here today hoping for understanding, for tolerance, for even a shred of open-mindedness from his father. He had hoped wrong. Richard Heir sat on the outdoor lounge chair, one long leg crossed over the other, a crystal glass of aged red wine balanced between his fingers. His suit was immaculate, his silver-streaked hair styled flawlessly, his gaze sharp and unyielding, the practiced look of a man who had built an empire by judging people's worth within seconds. He did not invite them to sit. He did not greet Elena. His cold, assessing eye swept over her from head to toe, lingering on her worn shoes, her simple bag, her unbranded clothing, as if cataloguing every flaw in her social value. "Lucas," he said finally, his voice low, calm, and devastatingly final, "and this." Lucas's shoulders tensed immediately. "Dad. You heard me." Richard set the wine glass down with a precise click against the marble tabletop. "I did not spend decades building this family's name, reputation, and influence to watch you attach yourself to someone from the lower urban class." The words hung in the warm summer air, sharp enough to slice through the peaceful garden breeze. Lower urban class. A cold, clinical label, stripped of all humanity. Elena's expression did not shift. She did not flinch, did not blush with embarrassment, did not rush to defend herself. She simply stood there, her dark eyes steady, calm, almost detached, as if the billionaire's blatant disdain did not touch her at all. But Lucas burned with quiet anger. "Her background does not define her character," he argued firmly. "Elena works hard, she's kind, she's disciplined, she's better than half the hollow socialites you invite to our galas." Richard's lips curved into a cold, condescending smile. "Discipline and kindness are admirable traits for an employee," he replied flatly. "They are not qualifications to marry into the Heir family." He shifted his gaze back to Elena, and the full weight of a billionaire's arrogance settled over the courtyard. "Let me be clear, so there is no misunderstanding," Richard said, each word deliberate and unmerciful. "You are a cafe worker from a common residential district. You have no family standing, no generational influence, no assets, no connections that could ever benefit this family. In my world, you have nothing to offer." Lucas's jaw tightened. "Father, that's cruel and unfair. Fairness is for people who have something to negotiate with." Richard's tone did not rise. He did not need to shout. Power spoke quietly. "You've been sheltered your whole life, Lucas. You think the world rewards goodness. It does not. It rewards status, capital, and legacy." He leaned forward slightly, his stare pinning Elena in place. You may have captured my son's naive affection with your quiet demeanor and humble little life, he continued ruthlessly. But you will never become a part of this family. You will never step into our social circle, never carry the Heir name, never represent our enterprise. I will block every path you could possibly take to cling to him. It was not a warning. It was a verdict. Lucas stepped forward, positioning himself partially in front of Elena, his voice thick with frustration. This is ridiculous. We love each other. Why do you only care about class and money? Because money and class are the only things that keep this family from collapsing into the mediocrity you're so eager to join. Richard's eyes turned icy. You think I built this empire by dating commoners? By letting sentiment override strategy? He waved a hand dismissively, as if erasing Elena's existence from his son's future. You will cut all contact effective immediately. No more secret meetings, no more cafe visits, no more late-night messages. I will have security monitor your schedule, your devices, your transactions. If I find you continuing this foolish relationship, I will reassign you to overseas branch work indefinitely. Lucas froze. His father did not bluff. Richard Heir controlled every single thread of his son's life, his trust fund, his position in the company, his residential privileges, his entire future. He could exile Lucas without a second thought. Elena finally spoke. Her voice was soft, calm, unshaken, almost gentle. Mr. Heir, she said quietly. You judge an entire person's worth based on where they live and what job they work. Richard arched one polished eyebrow, clearly amused by her audacity to reply. I judge people based on measurable value, he corrected coldly. Which you lack. Value isn't only measured in wealth or social rank, Elena answered steadily. Some kinds of value can't be listed on a balance sheet. Richard let out a low, mocking chuckle. How charmingly naive. That sounds exactly like something someone with no wealth or rank would say to comfort themselves. He stood up, towering over them, his broad frame exuding unshakable authority. Leave my property now, he ordered Elena. And do not return. Do not seek him out. Do not delude yourself into thinking you are special enough to cross class lines. People like you do not rewrite destinies. People like you are forgotten. Lucas's chest heaved with helpless rage. He could not fight his father's power. He could not protect Elena from this public humiliation. All he could do was watch the woman he loved be dismissed as insignificant, worthless, disposable. I'm so sorry, he whispered to her, broken. Elena turned her eyes to him, and there was no hurt, no resentment, no tears. Only quiet understanding. She gave him a small, reassuring nod, a subtle gesture so poised and mature it felt strangely out of place for someone who'd just been eviscerated by a billionaire's prejudice. It's all right, Lucas, she said calmly. Not all doors are meant to be forced open. Richard scoffed. Smart girl. At least you have enough sense to know your place. What he did not see was the faint, knowing glint in Elena's eyes. The quiet, unspoken truth hidden beneath her humble exterior. She was not bowing to his power. She was simply choosing not to reveal hers. Elena turned and walked slowly toward the iron gate, her steps unhurried, her back straight, no trace of defeat in her posture. The afternoon sunlight wrapped around her figure, gilding her ordinary clothing, turning her simple silhouette strangely regal. As she crossed the threshold out of the Heir estate, she paused for half a second, her gaze drifting back toward the luxurious courtyard, toward the arrogant billionaire who had just sentenced her as common, worthless, forgettable. A faint, almost imperceptible smile touched her lips. He thought he was crushing a poor girl's foolish dream. He thought he was protecting his empire from low-class infiltration. He had no idea. He had just arrogantly, recklessly, unknowingly blocked his son's future from the most powerful young heir in the entire state. The Voss legacy did not need marble villas or designer suits to command respect. It commanded empires. And soon enough, Richard Heir would learn exactly who he had dismissed so carelessly. Who he had underestimated. Who he had dared to belittle. The quiet girl from the neighborhood cafe was about to turn his entire stratified, wealthy world upside down. The moment Elena stepped through the iron gate of the Heir villa, the weight of class prejudice clung to her like thin summer humidity. Richard Heir's cold verdict still echoed in the air, "You have nothing to offer. You are forgettable." To any ordinary 24-year-old, such public humiliation from a billionaire would have shattered confidence, sparked rage, or forced desperate pleas for validation. But Elena walked down the tree-lined residential street with unhurried steps, her posture relaxed, her expression unaltered. She returned to the ordinary neighborhood that Richard deemed inferior, a stretch of quiet apartment blocks, family-run storefronts, and leafy sidewalks miles away from the gated luxury of the Heir estate. Her small studio apartment sat above the community cafe where she worked, a compact, tidy space with no marble finishes, no custom furniture, no endless staff to tend to every need. It was simple. It was humble. And it was exactly where she'd chosen to be. 3 years ago, Elena had stepped away from the towering, cutthroat world of the Voss conglomerate. Tired of empty formal galas, backstabbing elite politics, and a life where every smile was transactional, every relationship tied to profit and status, she had chosen self-imposed invisibility. She traded boardrooms for coffee steam, private jets for city sidewalks, and imperial authority for quiet anonymity. She wanted to learn ordinary life from the ground up. What she had never expected was to meet Lucas Heir, a boy born in gilded cages, yet kinder, more grounded, and far less arrogant than most men born into generational wealth. Lucas called her an hour after she left his family's villa, his voice tight with frustration and helpless guilt. "I'm so sorry for what he said," he murmured over the line, the faint rustle of his jacket proving he'd walked away from his family's estate to speak freely. He's spent decades ruling everyone around him. He doesn't know how to see people beyond their net worth. Elena leaned against her apartment window, gazing out at the neighborhood's twinkling streetlights, soft and unpretentious compared to the blinding chandeliers of elite mansions. "I know," she replied calmly. "He's not wrong about one thing, Lucas. I live a simple life. I have no family connections he'd recognize, no corporate title, no luxury assets." Lucas exhaled sharply. "But that's not what makes you valuable. That's never been what makes you you." There was a quiet, stubborn warmth in his tone, the same warmth that had drawn Elena to him in the first place. Unlike his father, Lucas saw character before class, heart before wealth. But Richard Heir had no intention of letting their quiet affection persist. By the next morning, the first wave of subtle, ruthless suppression arrived. Elena's cafe manager pulled her aside before opening hours, his expression awkward and flustered. "Elena, I hate to do this," he said quietly, avoiding her eyes. "We just received a formal business inquiry from Heir Enterprise. They're expanding local commercial investments, and they've made it clear they prefer more conventional stuff for their neighborhood brand partnerships." The subtext was unmissable. Richard Heir had thrown his corporate weight behind a petty grudge. He'd quietly pressured a small community cafe to push out a single ordinary employee. No threats. No public scandals. Just cold, invisible economic power, exactly how billionaires eliminated trivial obstacles. Elena nodded without hesitation, no flicker of anger or panic on her face. "I understand," she said softly. I'll finish my final shift today and hand over my schedule. The manager looked relieved, guilty all the same. You're one of our best baristas. This isn't personal. I know it isn't. She returned to her station, grinding coffee beans with steady, practiced hands, steaming milk with precise, effortless technique. She'd mastered handcrafted brewing long before she'd ever worked a civilian cafe job. Back in the Voss estate, private sommeliers and baristas had trained her on precision and refinement as part of her elite upbringing. It was a skill she'd kept for herself, a quiet joy no amount of wealth could replicate. She finished every order perfectly, greeted regulars with her usual gentle warmth, and closed out her shift without a single complaint. Watching her calm composure, the cafe's regular customers murmured quietly among themselves. To everyone around her, she was a poor, unlucky girl, crushed by the unyielding power of old money. No one guessed she was merely watching a petty billionaire throw trivial weight around, amused, more than threatened. By noon, Lucas texted her in a panic. My father froze my personal discretionary fund. He's revoked my city travel privileges and assigned a full-time assistant to monitor my schedule. I can't leave the villa without his approval now, Lucas's frustration was palpable in every short sentence. Born to wealth, he'd always resented his father's ironclad control, but he'd never faced such strict confinement before. Richard was cutting every thread connecting him to the ordinary world, determined to erase Elena from his son's life entirely. Lucas snuck one final message before his device was likely monitored fully. I won't give up on us. No matter what he does, Elena stared at the screen for a long moment, a faint, knowing smile tugging at her lips. She knew Lucas's resolve was genuine. But she also knew Richard Hale's character, arrogant, rigid, convinced wealth and status granted him absolute judgment over every human life. He thought he was protecting his heir from a low-class distraction. He was merely digging his own family's blind spot deeper. That evening, Elena cleaned out her cafe locker, tucking her plain apron and reusable tumbler into her canvas bag. She walked home through the quiet neighborhood park, watching children play on the swings, neighbors grill on backyard patios, and elders chat on wooden benches. This ordinary, unglamorous life was far richer in humanity than any elite gala she'd ever attended. As she walked, a group of privileged teenagers from the city's private high school passed her by, their designer outfits and sleek accessories marking their upper-class status. They glanced at her scuffed shoes and simple clothes, snickering quietly under their breath. "That's the girl Mr. Hale kicked out of his villa," one whispered. Lucas Hale's little commoner fling. No wonder she got rejected, she looked so plain. Most people would have ducked their heads, embarrassed or stung. Elena didn't flinch. She kept walking, her gaze forward, indifferent to their childish mockery. She had sat on international board floors, negotiated with heads of global enterprises, and overseen multi-billion-dollar asset adjustments. The judgment of spoiled wealthy teenagers was utterly meaningless to her. What no one recognized was the quiet grace in her indifference, not the passivity of someone powerless, but the poise of someone who had already outgrown every status game these people would ever play. Back in her apartment, Elena flicked open her vintage black vinyl record player, soft jazz spilling through the quiet room. She pulled out a half-finished architectural blueprint spread across her desk, a community renewal design project she'd been drafting for the neighborhood's aging public park. It was a volunteer project, unpaid, ordinary by elite standards. But the lines she drew were precise, layered with professional structural logic, sustainable design principles, and human-centered detail, skills taught only to the top-tier heirs of global enterprise families, not ordinary cafe workers. She worked steadily, her focus sharp and unwavering, completely unbothered by Richard Hale's petty suppression. Losing a minimum-wage cafe job was nothing to her. His corporate pressure was trivial against the sprawling assets and influence of the Voss empire. Richard thought he was dismantling her life, stripping her of her means of survival, forcing her to surrender or leave the city. In reality, he was only revealing his own smallness. He judged people by their clothes, their jobs, their zip codes. She judged people by their character, their restraint, their humanity. A soft knock tapped at her apartment door hours later. Elena folded her blueprint neatly, setting it aside, and opened the door. Lucas stood in the hallway, out of breath, his collared shirt slightly rumpled, having snuck out of the heavily guarded Heir villa under the pretense of a late-night run. His eyes were dark with worry. "He cut your jaw," he said immediately, his voice tight with helpless anger. "I know he did. I've been trying to reverse it all day, but he controls every local business tie we have. He won't budge." Elena looked at the boy who'd risked his father's wrath just to check on her, and her heart softened slightly. She nodded gently. "I know. It's okay, Lucas. Okay." He stared at her in disbelief. "He's bullying you. He's using his money to ruin your life just because you're not born into his shallow world. How is any of this okay?" Elena stepped aside, letting him into her quiet, warm apartment. The contrast between this humble space and his gilded villa was stark, yet Lucas's tense shoulders relaxed the second he stepped inside. No cold formality, no judgment, no status posturing, only peace. She turned to him, her eyes calm and clear, holding a quiet depth he could not yet comprehend. "Your father thinks status makes someone superior," she said softly. "But power that has to bully the ordinary is never real power." Lucas frowned, processing her words. He had always known his father was arrogant. But only now was he beginning to see how narrow, how insecure, that arrogance truly was. "He's going to keep going," Lucas said quietly. "He won't stop until you leave this city. I know him." Elena's lips curved into a faint, unreadable smile. "Let him try." The words were soft, without aggression, yet carried an unshakable certainty. Beneath her quiet, ordinary life, a dormant power waited patiently. Richard Heir was free to keep stacking his petty suppressions, keep clinging to his class arrogance, keep underestimating the girl he'd dismissed as low-class and worthless. The harder he pushed, the more thoroughly he would unravel himself. 3 days later, the annual City Elite Charity Gala swept through the downtown five-star Grand Ballroom. It was the most exclusive social event of the season, black-tie dress code, crystal chandeliers hanging from towering ceilings, silent waiters gliding with champagne flutes, and every face in the crowd belonging to old money, corporate executives, or influential social figures. Richard Heir was the co-host of the night. He stood center stage for the opening speech, dressed in a tailored black tuxedo, his voice steady and charismatic, projecting the image of a generous, refined, respectable tycoon. Cameras flashed softly. Social elites nodded and applauded. To the public eye, he was a dignified philanthropist, a successful entrepreneur, a role model for the younger generation. No one in this glittering room knew how small, how petty, how class-obsessed he could be behind closed villa gates. Lucas stood at his father's side, wearing a muted suit, his expression distant and restless. He had spent 3 days under strict house arrest, every movement monitored, every message filtered. Richard's control had turned suffocating, cold, and unforgiving. He thought he would have to endure the entire gala without seeing Elena. Until he spotted her at the entrance. Elena walked in alone. She wore a simple floor-length black slip dress, no brand logos, no diamond jewelry, no elaborate updo. Her dark hair fell loosely over her shoulders, her shoes plain satin, her makeup barely there. She had not been formally invited. She had no sponsor, no family name to announce, no social title to present. She looked like a stray guest who had wandered in from the wrong street, utterly out of place among the gowns, diamonds, and tailored luxury. A low murmur rippled across the ballroom the second she stepped inside. Whispers spread like wildfire. That's the cafe girl Lucas was seeing. The one Richard Hale personally rejected. Ordinary neighborhood background, no family power at all. How dare she show up here? The judgment was quiet, sharp, and unanimous. Lucas's eyes widened in shock, then softened with worried tenderness. He stepped forward instinctively, wanting to walk over, wanting to shield her from the dissecting stares of the entire elite circle. But Richard's cold hand clamped down firmly on his shoulder, holding him in place. "Don't move," Richard muttered through his polished smile, his voice icy and threatening. "Let her stand there. Let everyone see exactly how out of depth she is." He intended to humiliate her fully, publicly, in front of the entire city elite. He wanted to crush whatever naive hope she had left. He wanted to prove to his son, once and for all, that ordinary people did not belong in elevated rooms. Richard finished his opening speech and descended the stage, the crowd parting respectfully for him. He walked straight toward Elena, every step deliberate and authoritative, the aura of a dominating billionaire rolling off him in waves. The room went quieter. All eyes locked on the strange confrontation between the most powerful man in the room and the quiet, unassuming girl with no status. "Miss Elena," Richard said, his tone polished and falsely polite, meant for everyone's ears. "I must ask. By what invitation are you attending this exclusive charity gala?" Elena met his gaze calmly. "No invitation, Mr. Hale," she replied softly. "I came as a volunteer consultant for the Urban Community Renewal Fund." A ripple of mocking laughter circled the crowd. Volunteer consultant. The elite found it ridiculous, almost pitiful. A minimum wage cafe worker calling herself a consultant for city public funds? Richard's smile turned condescending. "Community Renewal Fund," he repeated slowly, mocking every word. "Sweet. Very grassroots. But I'm afraid this gala isn't for grassroots dreamers. This room is for people who build cities, not just draw little neighborhood sketches." The crowd chuckled in agreement. Richard tilted his head slightly, his voice lowering into sharp, disdainful precision. "You showed up here tonight thinking you could blend in? Thinking you could prove you're worthy of my son? Let me save you the embarrassment." He gestured broadly at the glamorous ballroom, at the wealthy crowd surrounding them. "This world runs on capital, legacy, and lifelong influence. You have none. You work hourly shifts. You live in a small downtown apartment. Your family has no standing, no history, no power. In every single measurable way, you are beneath this room." The words were brutal, spoken with gentle politeness that made them crueler than shouting. Lucas's jaw tightened painfully. He could not intervene without worsening everything for Elena. He could only stand frozen, burning with helpless rage, watching the woman he loved be publicly dismantled. Everyone waited for Elena to crumble. For her to flush, to stammer, to look ashamed, to retreat in defeat. But Elena did none of it. She stood straight, her eyes clear and steady, no flinch, no humiliation, no trace of inferiority. Instead, she looked directly at Richard and spoke in a quiet, unrushed voice that carried effortlessly across the silent ballroom. "You measure worth by capital and legacy," she said calmly. "But tonight's core project is urban public renewal, low-income community reconstruction, public space optimization, sustainable residential layout, and grassroots resource balancing." She paused slightly, her tone gentle yet unshakable. Your enterprise has donated the largest sum tonight, Mr. Heir. Yet your blueprint proposal for community renewal is structurally flawed, resource wasteful, and completely disconnected from the actual needs of local residents. The entire room froze. Silence crashed over the gala like a wave. No one had ever dared to critique Richard Heir's business judgment in public. No ordinary person would even understand the technical depth of his corporate charity projects. Richard's smile faded, his eyes sharpening with stunned offense. "Excuse me," he said coldly. "You believe you, a cafe worker, can critique Heir Enterprises' urban planning strategy?" "I don't believe it," Elena replied simply. "I can prove it." She raised one hand, gesturing toward the presentation screen at the front of the ballroom. "Your team's proposed park reconstruction overdevelops commercial zones, reduces public green space, raises neighborhood living costs, and pushes out low-income families. It's profit-driven, not community-driven." She listed the flaws accurately, precisely, with professional architectural and urban planning insight that stunned every industry expert present. Her analysis was layered, mature, and technically flawless, far beyond the capability of a regular college graduate, let alone a self-taught ordinary girl. Several senior urban planners and foundation directors in the crowd exchanged shocked glances. They recognized the depth of her insight immediately. This was not amateur observation. This was top-tier industry mastery. Elena continued steadily, her voice still soft, unaggressive, yet utterly commanding. "I submitted an alternative volunteer blueprint last week. It balances public welfare, ecological sustainability, and reasonable commercial development. It protects resident benefits while improving urban aesthetics. Your team ignored it because the submitter has no status." A wealthy foundation chairman standing nearby frowned deeply, stepping forward. "I remember that proposal," he said slowly. "It was the most professional, most feasible plan in the entire submission pool. The review board was discussing it all week. We thought it came from a famous overseas design institute." He turned to Elena, eyes full of disbelief. "That was you?" Elena nodded faintly. "It was." The room's atmosphere completely shifted. The mocking whispers died instantly. The judgmental stares turned into stunned, confused, respectful ones. The crowd could no longer see a low-class cafe girl. They saw poise, precision, professional mastery beyond their own elite children. Richard Heir's face stiffened visibly. He had come here to publicly humiliate her, to prove her inferiority, to crush her status. Instead, she had just dismantled his prestigious corporate project in front of every social heavyweight in the city. She had exposed his elite team's shallow profit-first design. She had made him look short-sighted, arrogant, and incompetent. His own refined, dignified mask cracked open for the first time all night. Lucas stared at Elena in pure awe. He had always known she was calm, kind, and intelligent. But he had never imagined she possessed this level of quiet, overwhelming power. Elena glanced back at Richard, her expression still peaceful, no triumph, no malice. Just simple, unwavering truth. "Status doesn't make the plan correct, Mr. Heir," she said softly. "Money doesn't make the judgment right. Sometimes, the person you underestimate the most sees further than your entire empire." Richard's jaw tightened hard, his chest tightening with suppressed rage and shock. He still refused to believe it. Refused to accept that a girl from the common neighborhood could outclass his elite professionals, outthink his corporate strategy, outshine him on his own gala stage. He would not admit defeat. Not tonight. Not in front of everyone. His eyes turned cold and dangerous. "Clever words," he said sharply. But professional skill does not change your social origin. You may have talent, but you will never belong to this world. He would double down on his prejudice. He would continue blocking, suppressing, and crushing her. Because admitting she was superior meant admitting his entire class philosophy was wrong. And Richard Hale could never bear that. Elena looked at him quietly, a faint, knowing glint in her eyes. He was still digging his own grave. Still underestimating the storm he had provoked. Still blocking his son's future from the person who ruled the upper tier of the world he spent his whole life crawling to reach. Very well, she whispered. If you insist on judging by origin, I will let origin speak for itself. The night's first great reversal was complete. But the real collapse of Richard Hale's arrogant world was only just beginning. The aftermath of the charity gala spread through the city's elite circle like quiet wildfire. Everyone who had attended that night whispered about the unknown girl who had single-handedly dismantled Hale Enterprises' polished urban renewal project. No one mocked Elena anymore. The mocking had turned into curiosity, then awe, then cautious respect. But Richard Hale did not feel respect. He felt humiliated. For the first time in decades, his absolute authority within the local business circle had been shaken, not by a rival tycoon, not by a foreign enterprise, but by a girl he regarded as low-class, uneducated, and replaceable. And humiliation only fed his arrogance. He refused to admit Elena's superiority. Instead, he convinced himself she was a schemer, a clever, opportunistic commoner who had studied one professional field to trick his naive son and fool the social crowd. That night, returning to the cold empty luxury of the Hale Villa, Richard locked Lucas in his study and dropped the full weight of his authority. You will cut all contact with her immediately, Richard ordered, his voice no longer polished, no longer restrained. The elite mask was fully gone, replaced by raw, dictatorial dominance. I will not allow a calculating nobody to tarnish this family's name again. Lucas stared at his father, exhausted and bitterly disappointed. For years, he had tolerated his father's control. He had obeyed the curfews, the corporate training schedules, the pre-approved social circles. He had swallowed the suffocating class rules because he had believed his father was at least rational, at least reasonable beneath his strictness. But the gala broke every last illusion. You didn't see what everyone else saw, did you? Lucas asked quietly, his voice hoarse. She wasn't scheming. She was right. Your entire professional team was wrong. She fixed your mistakes in front of the whole industry. Richard's eyes turned icy. Talent does not erase origin, he snapped. You think a little architectural knowledge elevates her above her station? You think skill cancels out a lifetime of lower-class roots? That's exactly your problem. Lucas raised his voice for the first time in his life. You judge everyone by where they were born instead of who they are? You praise hollow socialites with famous last names even if they're incompetent, and you trample good people just because they don't have your money. The words hung heavy in the quiet study. Richard froze, clearly stunned by his son's open defiance. He had always thought Lucas was soft, obedient, easily controlled. He had never expected his docile heir to confront him so fiercely, to challenge the core belief his entire empire was built upon. You dare lecture me? Richard's tone turned dangerous. I built everything you have. Every roof over your head, every privilege you enjoy, every opportunity you take for granted. I taught you how the world works. You taught me how to be cruel and shallow, Lucas retorted. You taught me to look down on people. But Elena taught me what real class is. The confrontation exploded into irreparable fracture. Richard's face darkened completely. He was not just angry, he was threatened. His own son had chosen a stranger over him, chosen an ordinary girl over the family legacy he had spent his life building. Fine, Richard said coldly, his tone final. If you insist on defending her, you will bear the consequences. He picked up his phone and issued a series of quick, ruthless instructions to his assistant. Free Lucas's secondary trust fund. Revoke his corporate trainee position. Suspend all his social privileges effective immediately. Lucas's breath caught. His father was stripping him of every resource, every safety net, every piece of power he had. I will watch you, Richard said ruthlessly. If you so much as text her again, I will strip everything. You will have no inheritance, no status, no future in this city. You will become as ordinary and powerless as her. It was the cruelest threat he could make. To a son raised in luxury, exile from status was worse than punishment, it was erasure. Lucas stared at his father, his chest aching with grief and rage. For the first time, he understood fully, his father did not love him. He only owned him. I'd rather be ordinary than be like you, Lucas whispered. The line shattered their relationship completely. No more gentle compromises. No more silent endurance. The father-son bond that had held for 26 years broke clean in that study. While the Heir family collapsed internally, Richard widened his suppression toward Elena. He was determined to force her out of the city entirely. The next morning, small but merciless pressures began stacking up. The community volunteer platform Elena worked on suddenly revoked her designer access. The local urban planning association removed her volunteer profile. Even the quiet neighborhood library where she printed blueprints received anonymous complaints forcing them to ban her from public printing resources. Richard never attacked her openly. He used invisible, systemic power, the same quiet power only old money could wield. He erased every channel she had to contribute, every platform she had to exist peacefully in this city. His logic was simple and brutal. Ordinary people rely on public resources, community connections, and local opportunities. Cut those off, and she would have no choice but to flee. He truly believed she was powerless without those civilian channels. He truly believed she was cornered, vulnerable, desperate. He had no idea she had never relied on any of it. Elena watched every suppression unfold with quiet detachment. She sat in her small apartment, staring at the notification emails rolling in one after another, access revoked, profile removed, participation terminated. To any ordinary person, it would feel like the whole city was pushing them out. To Elena, it was merely petty noise. Voss Group owned dozens of urban renewal platforms nationwide. They control institutional design reviews, municipal construction bidding, and high-level urban planning partnerships that Heir Enterprise could never touch. Richard was blocking her volunteer neighborhood accounts, thinking he was crushing her resources. Meanwhile, her family's board members ran entire city policy frameworks behind the scenes. The irony was almost gentle. She could have overturned every single one of his petty restrictions with a single text message. She could have frozen his company's urban development bids overnight. She could have made his entire gala project collapse before it even broke ground. But she did not. She was still waiting. Still letting Richard climb higher on his tower of arrogance, still letting him stack every mistake, every prejudice, every cruel judgment. The higher he climbed, the harder he would fall. Lucas reached out to Elena that night, his message broken and desperate. He took everything from me. My funds, my position, my reputation in the circle. He's blocking every resource around you. He wants you gone, I'm so sorry. I can't protect you right now, Elena replied calmly. You don't have to protect me. Lucas texted back immediately, confused and upset. Elena, don't be strong alone. He's too powerful. He'll run you out of this city, Elena stared at the screen for a long moment, her expression unreadable in the dim lamplight. She felt sympathy for Lucas. He was trapped between a ruthless father and a world he could not fully see. He was brave enough to defy class prejudice but powerless to change the system his father controlled. But she also knew the storm was approaching. The long, quiet game of hiding, enduring, and observing was almost over. She typed one final reply to him. Wait. You will see who is truly powerful soon. Outside her window, the city lights glittered bright and false, the same fake glamour Richard worshipped so fiercely. He thought wealth made him superior. He thought status made him right. He thought humble origins meant small potential. Every single one of his core beliefs was about to be incinerated. That evening, a sleek black town car glided quietly through the neighborhood streets, stopping a block away from Elena's apartment. A tall, rigorously dressed man stepped out, Mr. Carter, the exclusive executive of the Voss Group. He did not approach. He simply stood in the shadow of the street lamp, his posture perfectly straight, his gaze fixed quietly on Elena's window. His presence was silent preparation. The final chapter was waiting. The heir was ready to return. And Richard Hale's carefully constructed arrogant world was seconds away from total, irreversible collapse. The second annual Urban Renewal Summit opened on the weekend, the official follow-up event to the humiliating charity gala weeks before. This was no casual cocktail party. It was a city-authorized industry summit, packed with municipal planners, investment tycoons, architectural experts, and mainstream media reporters. Every attendee carried real power, the power to approve projects, allocate funds, and reshape the entire city's landscape. Richard Hale arrived as the keynote investor, seated in the front VIP row, restored to his polished, dignified public persona. He had spent the past week repairing his corporate image. After the gala fiasco, he doubled down on project promotion, pressured media outlets to downplay his flawed blueprint, and convinced the elite circle that Elena's comments were nothing but amateur opportunistic remarks. To everyone's eyes, Hale Enterprise was still the dominant leader in urban renewal. Richard was still the untouchable top-tier investor. Lucas sat beside his father, quiet and detached. He was still stripped of his funds, his position, and his social privileges. His relationship with his father remained cold and fractured. He had not given up on Elena, but he had grown increasingly worried. His father's suppression was relentless. No ordinary person could hold out this long against a billionaire's systemic squeeze. Lucas feared Elena would eventually be forced to leave the city, defeated and exhausted. The host took the stage, voice bright and formal. Before we announce the final approved urban renewal plan, we welcome the special honorary chair of this summit, the sole heir and operational director of Voss Global Consortium, who has been anonymously guiding this city's public welfare project. The crowd stirred with shock. Voss Global Consortium. A name far above Hale Enterprise. It was the top-tier multinational conglomerate that controlled national-level urban investment, high-end design institutes, and core municipal resource allocation. A legendary empire that even Richard Hale could only bow to and cooperate with. Richard's body stiffened instantly. He had always dreamed of collaborating with Voss Group, of climbing into their core business circle. For years, he'd sent countless cooperation applications, all unanswered, all ignored. He leaned forward slightly, eyes filled with eager reverence, waiting to witness the legendary heir's appearance. Please welcome Miss Elena Voss. The spotlight snapped to the entrance. The entire venue fell dead silent. Elena walked forward slowly. She wore a minimalist white formal dress, simple yet impossibly elegant. No exaggerated jewelry, no grand decoration, yet every step she took carried the calm, innate authority of someone born to command empires. Voss Global Consortium. The ordinary cafe girl. The low-class commoner he had mocked, suppressed, and chased out of public platforms. She was the legendary heir he had spent years begging to cooperate with. Richard's brain went blank for a full 3 seconds. All his arrogance, all his prejudice, all his class superiority crumbled in an instant. The world he had firmly believed in collapsed completely. Mr. Carter stepped in behind her, standing respectfully at her side, his rigid, powerful posture a perfect confirmation of her status. Miss Voss is the sole decision-maker of all Voss urban public investment projects, he announced in a steady, unshakable voice that echoed across the entire venue. All city renewal blueprints, fund allocations, and project final approvals require only her signature. Only Miss Voss has the final say. The phrase that defined top-tier power fell heavily on every listener's ears. Reporters frantically raised their cameras. Industry experts stared in disbelief. The elite crowd that had once whispered and mocked Elena sat frozen, faces pale with shock. Lucas's eyes widened completely, pure astonishment flooding his features. He finally understood. Her calm was not helplessness. Her tolerance was not weakness. Her quiet excellence was not luck. She had never been trapped by his father's power. She had always been the one holding all the power. Richard Heir sat stiffly in the VIP seat, his forehead turning cold with sweat. He recalled every word he had ever said to her. You have no status. You have no value. You are beneath this world. Ordinary people like you are forgettable. He recalled how he had pressured her job, erased her platform, blocked her reputation, and humiliated her in front of the entire elite circle. He had spent weeks crushing the hidden heir of the world's top consortium. He had arrogantly blocked his son from the most powerful family in the entire country. The irony was so brutal it made his hands tremble. Elena stood center stage, the bright spotlight wrapping around her figure. She glanced calmly at the stunned crowd, her gaze finally landing on Richard's ashen face. She spoke gently, her voice clear and unwavering throughout the silent venue. The revised urban renewal blueprint officially approved today is the volunteer plan I submitted 3 weeks ago. No one dared to question. No one dared to mock. The amateur grassroots plan he had disdainfully dismissed was now the official final plan endorsed by the highest authority. Many people judge value by class, wealth, and family background, Elena continued softly. I hid my identity and lived an ordinary life for 3 years, simply to verify one thing: the so-called upper class is not defined by money and fame. True class lies in pattern, kindness, and respect for every ordinary life. Her words were not retaliatory rage. They were calm, crushing truth. Richard's face burned with shame and panic. He could not sit steadily anymore. All his elite dignity, all his billionaire pride, all his lifelong class beliefs were completely shattered. He stood up abruptly, his usual poise completely gone, stumbling slightly in front of the entire industry. He was a tycoon admired by the whole city. But in front of Elena Voss, he was nothing but a short-sighted, arrogant, petty man who bullied the weak and worshipped the strong. Elena looked at him quietly. Mr. Heir, she said plainly. You suppress ordinary public resources, abuse corporate power for personal prejudice, and your project team's profit-driven design has harmed community interests. Voss Group will suspend all future cooperation with Heir Enterprise. One sentence. A death sentence for his enterprise. All the high-end projects Heir had been looking forward to, All the upgrading opportunities he had spent decades pursuing, all the elite circle resources he had accumulated, all vanished instantly. Richard's throat tightened violently. He stepped forward in a panic, losing all his former arrogance, his voice trembling with unprecedented humility. "Miss Voss. I was wrong. I was ignorant. Please forgive my prejudice. There is no need for apology." Elena interrupted him gently, without malice, without triumph. "Your prejudice is your own loss. You blocked your son's future, ruined your enterprise's upgrading path, and shamed your own family's reputation. All consequences are self-inflicted." She paused, her gaze sweeping over the stunned crowd. "I chose ordinary life to understand humanity. But you chose to use wealth to trample humanity. That is the fundamental gap between us." Richard stood frozen in place, utterly defeated. He had no words to refute. No power to resist. All his life, he had chased status, clung to class, and looked down on others. In the end, he became the most ridiculous joke in the entire venue. Lucas stood up slowly, his gaze calm and firm. He walked past his crumbling father, stepping steadily toward the stage. He had no more wealth, no more privilege. He was an ordinary man now, stripped of all hail glory. But his eyes were brighter than ever. He looked up at Elena, no longer the gap of class disparity, only sincere admiration and gentle persistence. "I don't have any elite status anymore," Lucas said softly. "But my judgment has never changed. Status never defines a person." Elena looked down at him, a faint, genuine smile finally blooming on her calm face. After the summit ended, Richard left the venue in complete embarrassment, surrounded by countless probing gazes. His elite reputation collapsed overnight, his enterprise's future fell into crisis, and his lifelong arrogance was completely annihilated. He got everything he deserved. He bullied the hidden dragon, and the dragon chose not to retaliate brutally, only to let him sink into the ordinary mediocrity he had always despised. That night, Elena returned to her small ordinary apartment. She turned on her vintage black vinyl player, made herself a cup of handcrafted coffee, and watched the quiet streetlights outside the window. She had exposed her identity not for revenge, not for vanity. She had only wanted to let the arrogant world know. Glory and wealth are fleeting. Only pattern and kindness last forever. She could return to the top-tier upper class anytime, reign over the empire born for her. But now, she finally had the pure freedom to choose her own life. No utilitarian social circles, no complicated family disputes, no transactional relationships. Just herself, a quiet life, and a future chosen by no one but her. As for Lucas, he was no longer a heir with gilded chains. He was just a boy who had seen through vanity, abandoned prejudice, and chosen goodness bravely. And for the first time in her life, Elena knew. Her new life was truly beginning.